members of staff.
Time now for our political panel. We're joined by Liberal MP Tim Wilson and Shadow Assistant Treasurer Stephen Jones. Welcome to both of you. Tim Wilson, I'll start with you. Why hasn't the federal government listened to the pleas from business and brought back JobKeeper?
Oh, I'm sorry, the federal government has been continually listening throughout this entire pandemic of providing economic support. And there was economic support introduced not in the Victorian lockdown that's ending tonight, but in the previous one. Staged additional support was provided in the extended New South Wales one. But any measures we've focused on providing has always been sought to be targeted to support people at the time they need it, but also to expect the state governments to bear their responsibility as well and to come to the table. And so, I'm sure there are always conversations going on between the federal and the state government, but it's up to the state government working with the Commonwealth to provide support and relief, and we have done that. And I'm sure that there will be ongoing conversations about it in the future.
Yeah, so the disaster support payment that the Commonwealth's offering is $600 a week as Greater Sydney enters its 5th week of lockdown. That's not really enough money to live on, is it?
Well, we're providing support for people to get through this crisis, but we're not seeking to provide a basis for people to be able to go on long term. We want lockdowns, of course, to end because we contain the virus and we're able to get people back into work. That's, I think, everybody's objective, whether you're at a state or a Commonwealth level. And as I said, as the conditions have continued on, there's been targeted measures to support business in exactly the same way that has happened at a state level too.
Stephen Jones, in Victoria, the Premier Daniel Andrews today has shrunk the border bubble with New South Wales because he says there's a refusal to lock people in Sydney into Sydney, so therefore he has no choice but to make these changes. Is that sort of rhetoric helpful?
Well, I don't think anyone wants to see this virus spread. I live on the south coast of New South Wales. We're defined as Greater Sydney, although we have no cases down this way. And everybody I talk to is concerned about a spread of the virus out of Sydney. And I can really understand the people down in Victoria not wanting to see the virus spread. And the longer this goes on, the greater that risk is. If you listen to the Premier of New South Wales in her press conference today, was absolutely clear to everyone that the New South Wales government is nowhere near getting this under control, that the lockdowns are going to continue for some time to come. We've got to govern for the circumstances we're facing, and this is why we're saying to the federal government more support is needed from the feds. Nobody's saying, as Tim has suggested, that we let the state governments off the hook. We absolutely should not. More business support is needed. But if you're a person paying rent in Sydney today, $600 a week won't pay the rent, let alone put food on the table. And this is going to go on for a lot longer than anyone wants and anyone thought at the very beginning of it. So more support is needed. More needs to be done for those casual workers, by the way, who were probably on a part-time or on a benefit, but doing the right thing out there with a casual job. They've lost their job, bumped back to their Centrelink benefits or their student benefits. They cannot survive on that. More social unrest will occur unless we see both levels of government coming to the table and providing more support.
Stephen Jones, what more can be done in terms of restrictions for the Greater Sydney region, given that we're seeing transmission primarily occurring in essential workplaces and as well between households? You simply can't police that, can you?
Yeah, look, once this virus gets away, and it was quite clear the New South Wales government didn't move quick enough to contain it when the outbreak started. Once it gets out, it's very, very difficult to contain. The government is foreshadowing tougher restrictions over the next couple of days. Regrettably, I think that's going to be necessary. Nobody wants to see the lockdown go for a day longer than it needs to, or the movement restrictions go for any more than is absolutely necessary. But we've had this tragic experiment go on in many senses. We saw Victoria subject to a lot of criticisms when it put some harsh measures in place last year. It appears those measures worked. New South Wales facing similar out-of-control spread in Sydney. I think it does require those harsher measures in place. The same sort of measures that Tim was writing to the Human Rights Commissioner last year about, asking the Human Rights Commissioner to overturn the decisions of the Victorian government. I think quite
That's
likely
actually
they're
a
the sorts of
lie,
measures
Stephen.
that
And
they're
in
the
fact, what
same
I asked
measures
them to do
that
is
the
provide
New
the
South
evidence
Wales
base
government is going.
for
Tim,
decisions.
please, I listen to you in silence. You'll do the same, mate.
Yes, but I didn't
The
lie
same
like you.
measures that the same measures that Tim was writing
Stephen Jones,
to
let's
the Human Rights Commissioner
give
about.
Tim Wilson the
The New
chance to
South
respond
Wales
to that.
the New South Wales
Well,
Premier is
sorry.
going to have to do.
What I wrote to the Human Rights Commission last year was to ask for the basis of the Victorian curfew, which, by the way, was never substantiated as having any impact. It wasn't actually about the lockdown. So Mr Jones is just lying to your viewers.
Tim Wilson, so on the restrictions,
every
Stephen Jones, let's just bring it back now. Tim Wilson, I wanted to ask you about the current level of restrictions in Greater Sydney. They seem to have not made an impact so far, almost 5 weeks into the lockdown. Were they adequate?
Well, obviously the objective is to get transmissions down to zero. Then the answer is no, it hasn't been in terms of the timeline. So, of course, the New South Wales is looking at stronger measures. In Victoria, we had some measures which were ineffective last time, like curfews. It had no impact on transmission. We had other measures like lockdowns because, in a similar way, the Victorian government didn't take measures fast, and as a consequence, it led to a more rampant community transmission. So everyone's learning, and we're learning against the backdrop of course, a new variant, the Delta variant, which wasn't the one that was around in Victoria, which is, so it seems, much more infectious, which has led to greater community transmission and may require a different approach.
Should, Tim Wilson, more vaccine supplies have been sent to southwestern Sydney on top of that extra 50,000 that the Commonwealth has found to send?
Well, what we want is vaccinations to go up across the country, and that's why we're up to nearly 1.1 million vaccinations every single day now occurring. And of course, there's 1.1 million. There's a share of that in Sydney. That requires other states to give up their obligations. So I think we've got to keep working to make sure everybody's vaccinated. If there's another state wants to assist and support Sydney to get more of those vaccinations, that they're entitled to do so.
Stephen Jones, I wanted to ask about the tax cuts, the change in policy from Labor. Labor will now back the stage 3 tax cuts. Do you personally support this?
Look, I backed the party position. I was a part of the discussions, and I backed the conclusion, the collective decision that we have made. We want to look forward, not backwards. We had some robust discussions with the government and in the community about all of these tax propositions. But frankly, we're committed to looking forward. What the people of Australia have been through some pretty tough times over the last 18 months can be assured of.
Yeah, you said it's the party policy, but what's your personal view? Because before you've said you were deeply concerned about stage 3 tax cuts.
Well, I'm deeply concerned about the capacity of governments to bring a budget which has ballooned under the Morrison and Frydenberg administration back into balance over the medium term. That is going to be a challenge, but these tax cuts are law, and we've got to deal with the circumstances that we face. My personal view is that we can have the best policies on earth, but unless we're in government, we'll never get to govern and put those policies in place. We've made it quite clear, Anthony's made it quite clear, that an Albanese Labor government will ensure that those tax cuts will be delivered. Together with our policies that are going to rebuild manufacturing in this country, together with our policies which are going to establish childcare as a right, together with our policies which are going to get the vaccination and the health policies back on track, we want to look forward, not backwards. These tax cuts are law, and we'll accept that.
Tim, Labor says one of the reasons that it won't reverse income tax cuts is to avoid debates about this issue, although it seems we're having one now. Or where does that leave the government in trying to create a point of difference?
Well, we just heard from Stephen Jones that a choice between doing what they believe to be right or putting themselves first. They've decided to put themselves first. And we know in the last election they took a suite of policy measures that would have added taxes to housing, added taxes to capital gains taxes and undermining retirees. They thought that was right at the time. They lost an election on it, so they've decided they'd rather abandon their agenda and put themselves first and the chance of getting into government over the Australian Australian people. This just sadly shows the reality, which is the modern Labor Party stands for nothing except themselves. And of course, the Australian people will judge when you don't actually stand up for anything or believe in anything, then you're going to find a situation where people are going to think you're going to fall for anything.
Stephen Jones, I know you were shaking your head there, but we've actually run out of time. So Stephen Jones and Tim Wilson, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you.